mean, people are like, I want to make tofu. And I'm like, that's amazing. No, I never feel any pressure. I'm a pure artist and I only follow my passions. Like, that's
Sure.
just a lie. They were watching me and they're like, she cooks just like she lawyers. Read a book, go
Right.
to an art museum, watch
Right.
a movie.
시청자 여러분 안녕하세요. Hello everyone and welcome back to our Win TV's 부대찌개 segment. 오늘은 아주 특별한 게스트가 와주셨는데요. 바로 소개하도록 하겠습니다. Today we have a very special guest on our show, whom I personally have been a fan of for several years. With us is Joanne Lee Molinaro, an attorney, vegan author, and food blogger from right here in Chicago. She's widely known as the Korean vegan, started her food blog in 2016, and began posting videos of her cooking and life stories in 2017. She has over 1 million subscribers on YouTube and over 3 million followers on TikTok. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, Joanne.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
I wanted to start with, I know that you're a lawyer and also a beloved vegan food blogger. Are there any skills that you've noticed crossover between the two professions?
Yeah. You know, I was once on this television show where I had to cook a meal in 30 minutes or less.
Okay.
And I had to grab all my equipments and all my ingredients. And I remember all of my partners at the office, my law firm office, they were watching me and they're like, she cooks just like she lawyers.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and it's
Awesome.
because people know me as being very efficient.
Sure.
And, you know, if you're a lawyer, then you know billable hours are expensive. So you try and do things as efficiently, but as effectively as possible. And
Sure.
so, in the same way, I'm very much like that in the kitchen. I plan ahead of time, I know exactly what I need, and I try to spend as little time as possible wasting moments in between.
Very cool. I know that in many of your videos, you also tell personal stories that are very dear to you while you prepare the dishes that you make. What do you think made you want to tie storytelling into cooking? I know that there's probably a process that you have for making your story time videos, and I wondered if the stories inspire the dish or if the dishes inspire the stories. So if you could tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah. Well, to answer the first question,
Mhm.
I wanted to start telling stories with the food because I thought it was important for people who enjoyed Korean cuisine or a different cuisine that they weren't used to
Mhm.
start also having an appreciation for the people who created those foods. And
Mhm.
I felt like storytelling was a really effective and easy way to do that. Everybody likes a good story. And most of the time, some of the best stories that we hear and that we share happen over a meal. So it
Sure.
made a lot of sense. In terms of the process for coming up with one of these, you know, I call them story time videos.
Mhm.
A lot of times there's literally no connection between the food
Okay.
and the story. You know, a lot of times what I make in a video is governed by what I want to eat that day. Sometimes they'll bear some relationship to the food I'm making, sometimes a very direct relationship. But a
Okay.
lot of times I'll just be like, you know what, this is a story I want to tell about my dad today, or this is a story I want to tell about my grandma today. And I'll be making like pasta. So,
Sure. That's fun.
yeah, whatever is in my head.
Very interesting. Along that line, our segment here on our YouTube channel is called BUDAE JJIGAE. And you have a storytime video on a vegan BUDAE JJIGAE recipe that I watched and enjoyed. That video was so powerful. And on the video, you talk about how you were an advocate for your parents. You tied that back really powerfully to how you hope to continue to be a voice for the voiceless. Is there a specific reason for that episode that you chose BUDAE JJIGAE as a dish to make for that story? Or was it, as you mentioned, something that you just happened to be hungry for at that time?
Well, I'm always hungry for pute jjigae. I am my
Yes.
father.
Awesome.
My father loves pute jjigae, and
Mhm.
I very much take after him when it comes to our tastes.
Mhm.
But pute jjigae has also, for me, always represented Korean resiliency. It was a dish that came out of a time of immense struggle in Korea's recent history. And, you know, I think there was always some level of shame associated with budae jjigae, at least in my family. You know, my mom was always like, "Oh, you know, why do you eat that?" But then on the other side, my father loved it. And I think
Mm,
I sort of embraced my father's love for that dish as this is not something to be ashamed of. This is what we did in order to survive. And now it tastes amazing. And
right.
I love that I can make it in a way that's consistent with my values and, of course, in my view, better for my health.
We are here in Chicago in the suburbs, and we know that you're from Chicago. Is there anything that you still enjoy eating that reminds you of Chicago?
Yes, and that is pizza, deep dish
Awesome.
pizza. Like, there's
Awesome.
really no more iconic dish than deep dish pizza in
Right.
my view, and, every time I have that and there are so many wonderful restaurants in Chicago now that do a vegan deep dish properly.
Awesome. Right.
Every single time I cut into one, I'm like, "Oh, yeah, this is Chicago to the bone."
I know that in the Chicago area and also nationwide, the Trader Joe's kimbap was a huge boom recently. And I noticed on your YouTube channel, you actually made sort of a recipe of your own. What does it feel like for you as a Korean American and also as a food maker to see the rise of popularity in Korean food in the United States?
I think it's exhilarating. I think it's so warming. I think that it's healing in some ways. I know that sounds a little dramatic, but
Sure.
I think there are probably a lot of Korean Americans and other Asian Americans like me
Mhm.
who had a lot of anxiety over their ethnic cuisines growing up. We were a little bit nervous about sharing our kimbap when we were little or inviting friends over to our house because of the smell.
Sure.
And now to see so many people embracing these smells, embracing these textures. I mean, people are like, I want to make tofu. And I'm like, that's amazing.
Right.
I
Awesome.
I think that's a really, really beautiful thing that especially young people, they're not just satisfied with the food. They want to know more about the culture underneath the food. And
Sure.
I think that is what is in some ways propelling the popularity of a lot of these foods.
It seems that you hopefully like to provide that context for the food that you make, which I think is really, really important and awesome. You're an avid runner, something that, you know, you're very multifaceted, which we think is super cool and impressive. Do you have any specific things that you like to cook to eat pre or post run? Are there any things that you feel that your vegan diet has done to help your performance in marathons? Anything like that? Tell us more about that, please.
Well, I love to make my mom's duck, which is
Okay.
rice. She has this really simple duck recipe that's so delicious and it's very calorically and carbohydrately dense, which is exactly what you need when you're running long distance. So I'm training for, well, I'm not training, I'm tapering for the New York City Marathon, which happens this Sunday. And
Wow.
making a big batch of my mom's duck to bring
Awesome.
with me to New York City so that I can have it in my pockets. I like to keep it simple and tasty. In terms of my vegan diet and what role it's played in my
Mhm.
training, I think one of the great things about a plant-based diet is that it helps to keep your inflammation in check.
Sure.
No matter what you're going to do, if you're a long distance runner and you're training for a race like a marathon, your body's going to get a little beat up along the way.
Sure.
And I honestly believe that it's the fact that I'm eating a diet that's very rich in antioxidants and anti-inflammatory properties that allows me to recover in a way that keeps me going for several months before the race.
Have you ever run the Chicago Marathon by chance?
I've run it 1, 2, 3 times, 3 times.
No kidding. Very cool. That just obviously happened here, so very cool to
That was
hear about that.
beautiful. It's
Yeah,
always
very
a
awesome.
wonderful race.
One thing I'm curious about as well is could you maybe give any advice or tips to anyone that might be watching this who's thinking about going vegan to sort of keep their values and, you know, not breaking the community while also um, being part of obviously a culture of Koreans and Korean Americans who are very food oriented?
I went plant-based, at least in part because I wanted to be a good role model for my father, who
Mhm.
was diagnosed with prostate cancer. And in my view, I do believe that it was a rather drastic increase in the consumption of his red meat that led to some health problems. He's since drastically reduced his consumption of meat, dairy, and animal products. And I think that's a really great thing. But at the same time, as you know, there was not really shame, but a little bit of exclusion. And I feel
Sure.
like estrangement that happened as a result of the fact that I wasn't eating kalbi and samgyeopsal and, all these things that I grew up eating with my family. Korea is, again, a country that has been riddled with a lot of struggle in the past 100 years even. And I always try and be mindful of that when I'm talking to my family and I'm trying to, coax them to eat a little less meat.
Sure.
To them, my mom and my dad in particular, meat is what allows them to survive. It's these are things that are ingrained in their head. And
Sure.
it's been an interesting process to see my parents unlearn that, because especially now that my dad is ill, he's the first person to say, I don't feel good when I eat meat. And he's body, and that's a really good thing. There are so many ways to connect with your culture, your heritage, and your family other than food. Read a book, go to an art museum, watch a movie, listen to some beautiful music. Food may be the easiest and tastiest and funnest, but it's not the only way. And you'd be surprised the dimension of your heritage that you become acquainted with if you allow yourself to just open up to these things.
Do you have any avenues besides food that you've traveled down to sort of explore your own culture?
Well, I think storytelling
Sure.
is an incredibly important way. When I was writing my book, I asked my parents to tell me their life stories. I was like, I'm so ashamed. Now, talk about shame. That is something to be ashamed of, that I was in my 40s when I first asked my mom and my dad, what did you guys like to eat when you were little? Did you go to school? Like, what was that like? Like, I mean, I never asked them these questions.
Sure.
And I finally had that reason to do so. And there was just this outpouring of powerful and sometimes very emotional storytelling that emerged from both my parents. And these are things that I wish I'd done with my grandparents, but I never
Sure.
had the nerve to do that. So I think that's one really important one, and one that we should continue to excavate as our parents age and as the generations that precede us. These are stories that will be lost forever if we
Yeah.
don't take time to collect them now.
I'm sure being a lawyer and then being a storyteller through social media are both positions in which you can kind of make this difference and spread awareness, tell stories on issues to people around you. Could you tell us about if there have been any similarities and differences in these professions, specifically regarding your ability that you feel to make impactful change?
That's such a great question. I think when I was an attorney, one of the similarities is that I was always tasked with telling a story. I was a trial lawyer, so I wasn't a
Okay.
tax lawyer, a very different kind of storytelling, but
Sure.
it was a trial lawyer. So my job was literally to convey the correct and truthful and compelling story.
Mhm.
In the case of a lawyer, I always have a client,
Mhm.
but in the case of the storytelling that I do right now, who am I actually representing? In many cases,
Mhm.
it is myself. These are my stories or stories related to my parents. And I
Sure.
think that storytellers, content creators, influencers occupy a very unprecedented space in the current environment. And the
Absolutely.
explosion of social media and the internet is, on the one hand, we are speaking to a vast community that is very, very ready to listen. And
Sure.
with that comes this responsibility to make sure that you're speaking on a topic over which you actually have some authority. That,
Mhm.
like, that's why I stick to me and my parents. Like,
Absolutely.
like, I don't want to talk about other people's stories unless, of course, they ask me to, and I really feel very comfortable that I understand it fully. But
Sure.
to me, I always start with myself and then maybe move forward to my mom and my dad and my grandparents, because these are truths that I feel very comfortable having authority over. Like, I know these things
Mm.
are true.
Do you ever feel a sort of pressure, whether it be from yourself, to create content that performs well versus content that comes from your heart or that you're passionate about?
Of course I do. I would be
Sure.
lying if I said that, no, I never feel any pressure. I'm a pure artist and I only follow my passions. Like that's
Sure.
just a lie. Like,
Mhm.
I think especially now that I've transitioned from being a full-time lawyer to being a full-time writer and content creator, well, this is my living.
Sure.
And what I try to do is balance my content so that there are times where I am very clearly writing about or talking about or doing a video about something that is very important to me and something I'm very passionate about. But
Sure.
I also balance that out with just fun videos of like, oh, okay, I'm not really passionate about this soup, but I'll
I
just
love
make
this soup.
it.
Right.
Yeah, like soup. It's healthy. It's good for
Sure.
you. It tastes good. So I think that that's important. I think it's not just important for purposes of continuing to build the brand and continuing to build on a community, but also for my own sanity. If I
Sure.
continue to just pour out my heart 100% of the time, always
Right.
talking about, that doesn't just create fatigue in the people watching me, it also creates fatigue in myself.
Of
And
course.
that balance, I think, is really, really important. The more and more I pursue the things that are important to me, whether it's writing, the podcast, or things that I'm very passionate about, the less and less obsessed I become with those types of metrics.
I can imagine. Because a lot of them, your content does seem very personal. So it's always good to just have a nice soup video.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Speaking of that, do you have a vision of do you see yourself continuing to make content as the Korean vegan for the future? And are there any projects that you are really eager to try that you've yet to try, or any personal goals that you might have for the future?
I think I will be the Korean vegan and creating food content for a very long time. And the reason I say that is because I just enjoy it
Sure.
so much. I was just working with this company that asked me to develop a recipe. I made these delicious pumpkin spice like mandu. And I was like,
Oh,
this is so great. And I've been doing this for a long time, since 2016, and I'm still
great.
not tired of it. So to me, that suggests continue doing it. I'm writing my second cookbook right now, which I'm excited about. I'm already really excited about my third cookbook. So
Awesome.
I started a podcast a couple years ago. It's
Mhm.
something that is very dear to my heart. There's not a lot of food involved in it. I'll mention it here and there. It's
Sure.
much more leaning into the storytelling aspect of the
Mhm.
Korean vegan, or in some cases, the advocacy aspect of it. And that's been really, really fun for me. And it's challenged me as a writer, as a thinker, and just as a human being. So I look forward to growing the podcast, growing that podcast community, and seeing where that takes me.
If there is one message that you would want to say, it can be as light or as heavy as you want it to be, no pressure. One message that you'd like to just share with our viewers.
I would say that community is incredibly important. And I live in LA now. I've been to New York a lot, and I've been to Korea, obviously, but I grew up, spent 43 years of my life in Chicago. And the difference that I've seen is that growing up, I was one of maybe 5 Korean people in my grade, one of 2 Korean people in my law school. I went to law school in Chicago as well. And I think that what that does is it creates both a hardiness, a toughness
Mhm.
in Chicago Koreans and Korean Americans, because there's a feeling of like we got to survive,
Sure.
on our own. But at the same time, it sometimes makes us a little bit too used to not looking for other members of our community.
Mhm.
And I think that there's so much potential in Chicago in particular for an incredibly loyal, a very strong, a very fierce Korean American community if we could learn how to aggregate a little bit better.
Sure.
And that is something that I think is really, really beautiful. It can be beautiful. I
Sure.
know that when Asian hate was happening, particularly during COVID,
Mhm.
like I started to see that. I started to see the
Mhm.
Korean American community really rally around, especially their elders. And I thought, wow, this is what the Korean community could be like here in Chicago.
Mhm.
And I think if we continue to aspire to that level of connection and community, we could do really amazing things.
Wow, very, very powerful, and I think very true. Thank you so much for taking some time to speak with us today. It was a super big personal honor and also just an honor on behalf of the broadcast team. So thank you again so much.
So much. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
You too. Take care.
All righty. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.